here's an example of Bent Larsen's opening by Bent Larsen, but he actually loses to former world champion Boris Spassky. So this is the Larsen's opening, b3, which he popularized. Boris Spassky controls the center with e5. And then when you're going to play it, you always get a fianchetto your bishop. That's the bishop to b2 in the corner like that. Black's going to develop his knight to c6 to control the center. Bent Larsen pushes the pawn to c4, so it's sort of an English opening with this. Bent Larsen wants to continue development and brings out the knight. Bent's going to bring out his knight, and he's going to try to castle early, but the problem with that opening, which isn't very good with this opening, is that Black can now make that knight move away to a worse square. Bent plays his knight to d4. Spassky doesn't want to trade yet. He wants to continue his development. Brings out his bishop to c5, and he's ready to castle. Bent trades one of the knights, and then Boris Spassky takes away from the center with this. Still has control of the center and is ready to castle, but he also wants to develop his other knight. Bent Larsen's behind in development, tries to play e3 to get the bishop out or push the pawn to d4 to control the center. Boris gets his bishop out to f5 and holds that pawn on e4. And then Bent tries to get his queen to c2 to put pressure on that center pawn. Then Boris Spassky brings his queen to e7 with this, controlling the center, but now he's actually trying to castle queenside and get the rook into the game. So what happens is White is getting his bishop to e2, ready to castle short. There's the castling along that Spassky does. But it looks like Bent doesn't want to castle yet. He pushes his pawn to f4 to lock everything up. Well, that allows Spassky to get his knight into g4 and attacking on the king side. So then Bent's going to push the pawn to g3, trying to get a solid king side with this. And now Boris Spassky attacks everything on the king side. He pushes his pawn to h5, and he's trying to crack the king side with h4 next. So Bent pushes his pawn to h3, wanting that knight to move away, but Boris Spassky ignores it, pushes the pawn to h4. He actually sacrifices the knight. Larsen takes the knight, and then Bent Larsen is now in trouble because after the pawn takes pawn, there's going to be a rook exchange with this, and Bent doesn't want that. So he pushes his rook to g1 to try to get the pawn. Boris Spassky brings the rook all the way down to h1 to try to trade off. Once the rooks are traded off, Boris Spassky pushes the pawn to g2. He's ready to queen. There's the rook to f1. What else can he do? Boris Spassky then brings out his queen, h4 to check. King moves out of the way for d1. And then Boris Spassky queens his pawn, and Bent Larsen has to resign in this Larsen's defense.